Evan was returning home late. The streets of the alien city were almost empty, the air heavy with a strange silver mist that clung to his coat. Neon lights from alien shops flickered weakly, casting distorted shapes on the walls. It had been a long day at the repair docks, and all he wanted was a warm meal and sleep as he turned into the narrow alley that led to his apartment. He slowed down. Something was wrong. The quiet was not the usual quiet. It felt tense, like the air itself was holding its breath. Then he heard its soft, quick scratching. Coming from near his door, he stopped a few steps away. Listening, the sound was irregular, like claws lightly dragging on metal. It wasn't loud, but in the still night, it carried clearly. For a moment, he thought it might be a stray scavenger. Animals, small but dangerous. He adjusted the grip on the small stun baton in his pocket and stepped closer. The scratching stopped. Silence. Evan's boots crunched softly on the wet ground as he moved forward. Then his eyes caught a small shape. Curled in the shadow right beside his door, she was tiny, no taller than a child, but clearly not human. Her body was covered in short, silver-gray fur that looked soaked from the misty rain, to wolf-like ears twitched nervously on top of her head. Her tail, thin and fluffy, was wrapped tightly around herself. Glowing amber eyes peered up at him. Reflecting the neon light like glass, Evan froze. She didn't look like a wild predator. But there was a tension in her posture, a readiness to bolt her to fight. Her breathing was fast, her chest rising and falling under the thin, torn cloth she wore. The cloth looked like it had once been a simple dress, but now it was ripped in several places, frayed at the edges, and even in the dim light. He could see faint scars running along her wrists and neck. "What are you doing here?" Evan asked quietly, his voice low but not harsh. The Wolfgirl's ears flattened. But she didn't move. She pressed herself closer to his door, as if it was the only safe place left for her. Evan glanced up and down the alley. There was no one else, no sign of pursuit. But something about her eyes told him she was running from somewhere, maybe from someone. She looked cold, her fur damp, her thin shoulders shaking. He could just step over her, go inside, and pretend she wasn't there. After all, she wasn't his problem, but his hand stayed frozen on the door lock. She was staring at him not with the eyes of an animal, but with the eyes of someone who knew fear, and was begging silently for a little safety. Evan sighed. "You can't stay here," he said, though his voice lacked conviction. Her ears twitched at his words, but she didn't get up. Instead, she curled herself tighter, her tail pressing over her legs. He noticed then how thin she was bones. Visible under her fur, it had been a long time since she'd eaten properly. The rain began again. Light drops pattering against the metal walls of the alley. She shivered, but still didn't move. Evan hesitated a moment longer, then unlocked his door and stepped inside. Warm air from the heater spilled out into the cold alley for a second. Her nose lifted, catching the scent of warmth and dry air. Her eyes softened just a little, but she stayed where she was. Evan looked back at her. "Suit yourself," he muttered. He closed the door, but didn't lock it, in his small apartment. He took off his coat. But his mind stayed in the alley. He could still see her face, those amber eyes. Wet fur and trembling frame. Hours passed. Evan lay in bed. But the silence wasn't silent anymore. Through the thin door, he could hear soft breathing and the faintest whimper. Like a pup dreaming of something terrible. The sound made it hard to sleep. It made him feel like he had left someone out in a storm, someone small, someone who had chosen his door out of all the doors in the city. At one point, the scratching returned soft, hesitant. It wasn't the kind of scratching that demanded entry. It was the sound of someone reminding him they were still there, still waiting. Evan stared at the ceiling, his jaw tight. He didn't know who she was, what trouble followed her, or why she had picked him. But one thing was certain. This was Not the last night she would be at his door, and deep down, he already knew he would open it. Morning light in the alien city was never truly warm. The sun's pale rays filtered through layers of cloud and drifting mist, turning everything silver. Evan stepped out of his small bedroom, still feeling the weight of the strange night. His eyes went to the front door automatically. He wasn't sure if he expected her to be gone or still there. When he opened the door, the cool air rushed in. And there she was, curled up exactly where she had been the night before. Her silver-gray fur was still damp, but now her eyes were half closed. She looked exhausted, the kind of tired that came from more than just one night without sleep. When the door opened, her ears twitched, and she blinked at him slowly. "You're still here," Evan said quietly. The Wolfgirl didn't speak. She just watched him. Her tail gave a small, slow movement, but it wasn't playful. It was more like a nervous habit. Evan sighed and stepped aside. "Come in," he said, his voice firm but not unkind, for a moment. She hesitated. Her glowing eyes darted past him into the room, checking for danger, then on cautious feet. She stepped inside. Her claws clicked softly against the floor as she moved. The warmth of the heater seemed to wrap around her immediately. She closed her eyes for half a second, as if she wanted to melt into it. Evan walked to the small kitchen and started making breakfast. It wasn't much, just some bread, a pot of thick vegetable soup, and a kettle of hot water. He could feel her watching him from the corner. Every move he made, every sound of the pan, her eyes followed. When he set the bowl of soup on the small table, she hesitated again. Then she sat down, her tail curling around the chair leg. She picked up the spoon awkwardly, like she wasn't used to using one, and took a small sip. Steam curled up into her face, and for the first time, Evan saw a flicker of relief cross her features. She ate slowly at first, but as soon as she realized he wasn't going to take it away, her movements became quicker, almost desperate. She finished the bread in 2 bites and drank the last of the soup straight from the bowl. Evan poured her more without saying a word. When she finished the second serving, she leaned back slightly. Her ears moved as if listening for sounds outside. It was then Evan noticed something even when she looked calm. Her eyes kept flicking to the door and the windows. She was always on alert. He sat down across from her. "Do you have a name?" he asked. She looked at him for a long time. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. Finally, she said, in a soft, broken voice, "Lyria." The way she said it made him think she hadn't spoken in a long time. Evan nodded slowly. "Where are you from, Lyria?" She shook her head, looking down at her empty bowl. Her hands gripped the edge of the table, claws tapping nervously. When she finally spoke again, her voice was almost a whisper. "Far away, not safe." Evan felt a knot form in his chest. There were a lot of not safe places in this city. He had seen what happened to the weak and unprotected. Her scars, her torn clothes, the way she always kept her back to the wall, it all told him the same story. She had been taken from somewhere, used, and thrown away before he could ask more. There was a sound outside. Lyria froze, ears flicking sharply toward the door. Evan walked over to the window and glanced out. Just a delivery drone, buzzing past. But Lyria's reaction told him enough. She was expecting someone to come for her. He decided not to press her with more questions. Instead, he took the empty dishes to the sink and tried to act normal. But in his mind, a decision was forming. If someone was after her, she couldn't stay here out in the open. Yet sending her back to the streets felt like signing her death sentence. Lyria stood near the door, looking at it as if she was considering leaving. Then she turned to him. Her voice was still broken, but the words were clear. "Can stay." Evan looked at her for a long moment. The easy answer would have been no. He could avoid trouble, avoid the danger that came with her. But he remembered last night the way she had chosen his door out of all the doors in the city. And now, the way she was looking at him, not with expectation, but with quiet hope. He nodded. "For now," he said, "you can stay." Her ears lifted slightly, and for the first time, he saw the faintest hint of a smile on her lips. It wasn't much, but in that moment, it felt like the first crack of sunlight breaking through a dark sky. Evan didn't know what trouble would follow her here, but he had the uneasy feeling that by letting her in, he had just stepped into something far bigger than either of them. The next morning, Evan decided it was best to keep his routine if he acted like nothing had changed. Maybe no one would notice the tiny alien Wolfgirl now sharing his apartment. Still, he told Lyria to stay inside while he went to work. Her ears lowered, clearly unhappy with the idea, but she didn't argue. She simply sat on a small couch, tail wrapped tightly around herself, watching him put on his coat. "I'll be back by evening," Evan said. Lyria tilted her head slightly, as if trying to read his tone. He hesitated, then added, "Lock the door after I leave. Don't open it for anyone." She gave a small nod, though her eyes told him she didn't like being left alone. The streets were busier that day. Hover bikes whined through the air, alien merchants shouted in strange accents, and delivery drones zipped between tall buildings. Evan made his way through the crowded market district, heading toward the repair docks. Halfway there, he got the strange feeling he was being watched. He brushed it off until he caught movement in the corner of his eye. At first, he thought it was just a shadow in the crowd. Then he saw a familiar pair of glowing amber eyes peeking from behind a fruit stall. "He stopped, Lyria," he muttered. Under his breath, sure enough, the small wolf girl stepped out, tail low but swaying, ears twitching nervously. "What are you doing here?" he asked quietly when she approached. She didn't answer in words. Instead, she simply walked beside him, keeping close enough that her arm brushed against his. Her head turned constantly, scanning the crowd. Evan realized she wasn't just following, she was watching over him. It should have been annoying. Instead, he felt a strange mix of concern and something else like a faint warmth in his chest. But there was also danger. People were staring, some with curiosity, others with disapproval, and a few too few to be coincidence were watching Lyria with sharp, calculating eyes. They passed a stall selling metal trinkets. The merchant, an older alien with scales like dull gold, leaned forward and hissed, "You should not be walking with one of those." Evan frowned. "One of what?" The merchant's eyes flicked toward Lyria. "They bring trouble. Owners come looking." Evan didn't respond, but his stomach tightened. They moved on. But the warning stayed in his mind. By the time they reached the repair docks, Lyria had followed him through half the city. She sat quietly in a corner of the workshop while he worked, watching every move he made. When a customer entered a large, rough-looking alien with heavy cybernetics, Lyria's ears went back. Her tail lowered, and she positioned herself between Evan and the newcomer. The customer noticed, smirked, and said something under his breath in a language Evan didn't understand. The tone was enough to make him uneasy. Hours later, when Evan finally locked up, the sky was already dim. The city's lights reflected off the mist, turning the streets into rivers of neon. As they walked home, Lyria stayed close. But halfway through a narrow side street, she suddenly stopped. Her ears flicked toward the rooftops. Evan followed her gaze but saw nothing. Then a figure stepped out from the shadows ahead, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a long coat. Another figure appeared behind them, blocking the way back. Evan's pulse quickened. The man in front spoke first, voice smooth, but with an edge. "That little wolf you've picked up. She's not yours." Lyria's fur bristled instantly, a low growl rumbling from her throat. The man smiled faintly. "Her owner's been looking for her." Evan's jaw tightened. "She's not property." The man's smile didn't fade. "Everything in the city is property to someone." The one behind them took a step closer. Lyria shifted, standing half in front of Evan, half ready to spring. Her growl deepened. Evan didn't know if she could actually fight these men, but he could see the truth: she was ready to try. The tension stretched in the cold night air. Finally, the man in front gave a small shrug. "Enjoy your time together, human." "It won't last." They stepped aside, melting back into the shadows as silently as they had appeared. Evan didn't move for several seconds. When he finally spoke, his voice was low. "You followed me to keep me safe." Lyria gave the smallest nod, her eyes still scanning the dark corners of the street. Evan felt a strange mix of frustration and gratitude. She had put herself in danger just to watch his back, and in doing so, she had also confirmed something: the danger wasn't far away anymore. It was already following them. When they reached home, Evan didn't tell her to stay inside next time. He didn't have to, because deep down, he knew she would follow him anywhere. Like a shadow with fur and amber eyes, night settled heavy over the city. The streets outside Evan's apartment were quieter than usual, the mist thicker, muffling distant sounds inside. The small room was warm, the faint hum of the heater filling the silence. Lyria sat near the window, her ears flicking every so often toward noises only she seemed to hear. Evan tried to read, but his mind was restless. The meeting in the alley earlier still burned in his thoughts. Those men hadn't been bluffing. It was late when it happened. A hard knock on the door, 3 sharp raps that echoed through the room. Lyria froze, ears instantly alert, tail stiff. Evan set down his book and walked to the door slowly. He didn't open it. "Who is it?" he called, keeping his voice even. Silence, then a voice smooth, deep, and unfamiliar answered. "Open the door, human, we need to talk." Evan's grip tightened on the handle. "I don't know you," he said, from the corner of his eye. He saw Lyria move closer, her body low, muscles tensed. The voice came again, this time with an edge. "It's about the creature you've been hiding." Evan's jaw clenched. "She's not a creature, Ka," he said. A faint chuckle came from outside. "You can call her whatever you like, but she's ours. And you're making a mistake keeping her." Before Evan could reply, another sound reached him: heavy footsteps on the metal walkway outside. Multiple people. Lyria's fur bristled, a low growl escaping her throat. Evan glanced toward the window. 2 shadowy figures stood there in the fog, blocking any escape that way. They were surrounded. The knocking turned into pounding. "Open the door, human." "You don't want us to break it down?" the voice barked. Evan stepped back, heart pounding. Lyria moved to stand between him and the door, her growl deepening. "Stay behind me," Evan whispered, but she didn't listen. She crouched lower, claws flexing against the floor. Ready to spring, the pounding stopped suddenly. The silence that followed was worse. Evan could almost feel the tension pressing in from all sides. Then, without warning, a loud metallic clang rang out, the sound of someone striking the door with something heavy. Once, twice, 3 times, the impact rattled the hinges. Evan knew the door wouldn't hold forever. His mind raced. He had no weapons besides the small stun baton in the drawer, and Lyria? She looked ready to fight, but she was small. If they broke through, both of them could be overpowered in seconds. The 4th hit was harder. A dent appeared in the metal. Evan grabbed the baton, activating it with a sharp buzz. The blue electric light reflected in Lyria's eyes. But she didn't flinch. Instead, she gave him a quick glance, something between warning and trust, then turned back toward the door. From outside came a muffled conversation. "He's stalling." One voice said, "Push in." Another replied. Evan tightened his grip. He was about to tell Lyria to get ready when the pounding stopped again, and then footsteps retreating. A door somewhere down the hall slammed. Silence returned, broken only by the distant hum of the city. Evan didn't move right away. He waited, listening, finally. After what felt like minutes, he went to the door and pressed. His ear to it. Nothing. They're gone, he whispered. But Lyria shook her head. Her ears twitched toward the far end of the hall. They wait. She murmured in her broken voice. Evan realized she was right. They hadn't given up. They had just stepped back, probably watching, waiting for a better moment. He locked every bolt on the door, closed the window, shutters, and pulled the small emergency lamp closer. The air inside felt heavier now. They ate dinner in silence, both listening for the smallest sound outside. Even the clink of spoons against bowls seemed too loud. Hours later, when Evan finally tried to sleep, Lyria refused to rest. She stayed near the door, sitting with her back against it. Her tail lay still across her legs, her amber eyes fixed on the shadows under the frame. Evan drifted in and out of uneasy dreams, always waking to find her still there. It was only just before dawn that she finally moved quietly, curling up beside the door, her body blocking it as if her small frame could stop the world from getting in. Evan watched her from his bed. He knew she wasn't safe here. He also knew that if those men came again, they wouldn't knock next time. They'd break through. And when that happened, he had a choice to make. Let them take her or fight for her. The city's morning light felt colder than usual, even with the heater running. Evan couldn't shake the chill from the night before. He kept glancing at the dent in the door, reminder that the strangers could return any time. Lyria sat on the couch, knees pulled close, her tail wrapped tightly around her legs. She looked calm, but Evan noticed her ears twitch toward every sound from the street. They didn't talk much during breakfast. Evan made her another bowl of soup, and she ate it quietly, eyes fixed on the table. Finally, he broke the silence. Lyria, if they come back, we need to be ready. Her eyes lifted to his. Slowly, she nodded. Ready, she said in her halting voice. Evan wasn't sure what ready meant for her. She was small, barely reaching his chest, but there was a sharpness in her gaze, like a blade hidden in silk. He didn't want her in danger, but he also knew she wouldn't sit back if things turned violent. Later that afternoon, Evan decided they needed supplies, food, water filters, and maybe something better than his old stun baton. He didn't want to leave her alone again, so he told her to come with him. She seemed almost relieved, as if she'd been expecting him to try to make her stay behind. The streets were busy, but Evan kept to the smaller lanes. They moved quickly through the market, picking up what they needed. It was going smoothly until it wasn't, as they passed an alley between two tall buildings. A hand shot out and grabbed Evan's shoulder. Before he could react, a tall alien man stepped into view, his mouth curling into a grin. Well, here she is, he said, his eyes locking on Lyria. Another man appeared behind them. Blocking their escape, the first one stepped closer. She belongs to someone important. Hand her over, human, and walk away. Evan's instincts screamed at him to step in front of her, but Lyria didn't give him the chance. Her body moved in a blurrier's flat, claws out, tail lashing behind her. The man reached for her arm. A sharp snarl tore from her throat, and then her teeth sank deep into the side of his hand. The man howled in pain, stumbling back, blood dark and almost black spilled from the bite marks. Lyria didn't let go. Immediately, her growl vibrating through the air when she finally released him. Her claws raked across his arm in a quick, controlled slash. The second man rushed forward, but she spun toward him, crouched low, her teeth bared, every line of her body screaming predator. Evan snapped his stun baton on. The blue crackle of electricity lit the narrow alley. "Back off," he growled, stepping beside her. The injured man cursed, clutching his hand. The second man hesitated. He had seen enough to know this wasn't going to be easy prey. "This isn't over," the first one spat. They backed away slowly. melting into the crowd at the end of the alley, but their eyes stayed locked on Lyria. Until they were gone, Evan's heart was still pounding. He turned to her. "You could have been hurt," he said, more sharply than he intended. Her ears drooped slightly, but her eyes stayed steady on his. "You." "Mine," she said simply. It took him a second to realize what she meant. She had been protecting him, just as much as herself. They hurried home, keeping to side streets, when they finally stepped inside. Evan locked the door and leaned against it. "You didn't have to do that," he said again. Softer this time, she tilted her head. "If not?" "They take you," she murmured. He almost laughed at the irony. He had been worrying about protecting her, and she had been worrying about protecting him. That night, they shared a quiet meal. Lyria sat closer than usual, her tail brushing against his leg under the table. She didn't smile, but there was a calmness in her posture that hadn't been there before. Evan realized that something had shifted between them. She trusted him, and he, despite himself, trusted her. Even her teeth, sharp and dangerous, didn't scare him anymore, but in the back of his mind, he knew the men wouldn't forget what happened today. They would return, and next time they might not come with just words. The next day was restless from the start. Evan didn't even try to go to work. The memory of the alley fight was too fresh, and the men's warning still echoed in his mind. Lyria stayed near the window, watching the street below with sharp, unblinking eyes. Her tail twitched every so often, a sure sign she was on edge. By afternoon, Evan decided they needed to leave the apartment for a while if they stayed too long in one place. The men might corner them. He grabbed a small bag with food, water, and the stun baton. "Stay close to me," he told Lyria. She didn't reply, only gave a small nod. They took the back streets, moving quickly, but Evan could feel its eyes on them. Every time he glanced over his shoulder, he caught glimpses of movement in the mist, a figure disappearing around a corner, a shadow ducking into a doorway. Lyria noticed too, her ears angling toward sounds behind them. When they turned into a narrow passage between two old buildings, Evan's gut tightened. The alley opened into a small courtyard, and standing there were two of the men from before. One of them smiled coldly. "Going somewhere? Human?" Evan spun to leave, but three more figures stepped into the alley behind them. Blocking the way, the leader raised a hand. "No need to make this harder. Just give her back." Lyria's growl was low, but dangerous. Evan shifted his grip on the stun baton. "You're not taking her," he said. The leader sighed. "Then you're coming too." The first lunge came fast. Evan swung the baton, the electric crackle hitting one man's arm. He stumbled back with a curse. Lyria darted forward like lightning, her claws slashing the leg of another attacker. But there were too many, and more were closing in. "Run!" Evan shouted. He grabbed Lyria's arm and bolted toward the far side of the courtyard. They crashed through a side gate and into another maze of narrow lanes. Shouts rose behind them, heavy boots pounding on the metal walkways. The city became a blur. Sharp turns, low arches, staircases leading into shadow. Lyria ran with surprising speed for her size, weaving between obstacles. She led him through gaps in fences and under half-closed security shutters. But the men were relentless, their footsteps always close behind. They reached a long market street. Evan and Lyria darted between stalls, knocking over crates of alien fruit. Vendors shouted in protest, but Evan barely heard them over the chase. A heavy thud made him glance back. One of the pursuers had leaped onto a stall roof to cut them off. "This way." Lyria's voice was sharp now, more confident than he'd ever heard it. She turned into a dim tunnel under a bridge. The smell of damp stone and rust hit them instantly. Water dripped from above, splashing into shallow puddles behind them. The echoes of running feet grew louder halfway through the tunnel. A figure dropped from the shadows ahead. Evan skidded to a stop. The man was huge, his arms thick with cybernetic plating. "End of the line," he said with a grin. Lyria didn't stop moving. She veered left, leaping onto a stack of old crates and scrambling up to a side ledge. Evan followed, his boots slipping on the wet wood. A hand grabbed for his ankle. He kicked hard, breaking free just as Lyria pulled him onto the ledge. They emerged into another alley, but this one was even narrower. Lined with old metal piping, almost Lyria panted. Evan didn't know where she was leading him, but he trusted her now. A final burst of running brought them to a hidden staircase spiraling upward. They climbed fast, hearts pounding at the top. They found themselves on a rooftop overlooking the city's lower districts. Mist swirled around the tall buildings, neon lights glowing faintly below. Evan risked a glance down. The pursuers had reached the base of the staircase, but didn't follow immediately. Instead, they stood there, watching. One of them called up, "You can't run forever." Lyria bared her teeth in silent answer. Evan turned to her. "Where now?" She pointed toward a cluster of rooftops connected by narrow bridges. It was risky, but it would get them far from this part of the city. They ran again, leaping from one rooftop to the next. The wind stung their faces. The drop below enough to make Evan's stomach twist, but Lyria moved like she belonged up here. Her balance flawless by the time they reached a quiet, abandoned structure at the far end. The shouts had faded inside. The building smelled of dust and old metal. They collapsed against the wall, breathing hard. Evan looked at her. "You knew where to go." She gave a small shrug. "Ran before," she said simply. Evan realized this wasn't her first time escaping something or someone. And as much as they had shaken off the chase for now, he knew the hunt wasn't over, not by a long shot. The abandoned building gave them one night of quiet. Evan stayed half awake, listening to the wind whistle through broken vents. Lyria slept beside the wall, curled up but tense, her ears twitching at every sound. When morning came, the city outside was wrapped in thick fog. It felt like the world was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. Evan knew they couldn't hide here forever. He thought about finding his old friend Rain, someone who worked in the city's underground network. If anyone could smuggle them out, it was him. But getting to Rain meant crossing half the city. And the men chasing them knew the streets as well as Lyria did. Maybe better. They left just after sunrise, moving fast along the rooftops and narrow alleys. The fog made it easier to stay hidden, but it also meant danger could be only a few steps away without them seeing it. Lyria stayed ahead, glancing back every so often to make sure Evan was keeping up. Her tail flicked when she was nervous. And today, it barely stopped moving. Halfway to Rain's safe house, the fog shifted. Shadows appeared on both sides, figures moving in fast. It was them, at least 6 this time, blocking every exit, nowhere left to run. Human. The leader called out, his voice low and certain. Evan's grip tightened on the stun baton. Lyria stepped forward, her growl rolling like distant thunder. The leader smirked. "You've got spirit, little wolf, I'll give you that." He raised his hand, and the men closed in. The first attacker lunged. Evan swung the baton hard. The crackle of electricity lighting the fog. The man staggered back with a shout, but another came in from the side. Lyria moved like lightning, claws raking across his arm, her teeth snapping dangerously close to his throat. The alley became chaos, boots pounding, weapons swinging, the sharp scent of blood in the air. Evan fought with every ounce of strength he had, but there were too many. A blow caught his shoulder, making him stumble. Lyria leaped in front of him, knocking the attacker down. She didn't hesitate. Her teeth sank into his forearm until he screamed and dropped his weapon. The leader stepped forward now. He was bigger than the rest, his coat shifting to reveal metal armor plates beneath. "You've made this difficult," he said, pulling a curved blade from his belt. He came at Evan fast. The baton clashed with the blade, sparks flying in the fog. Evan's arms shook from the impact. Before the leader could strike again, Lyria launched herself at him. Her claws scraped across his armor, her teeth snapping toward his neck. He roared and threw her off, but she landed on her feet. Amber eyes locked on him. This wasn't just a fight for survival, was personal now. 2 more attackers tried to grab Evan from behind. He twisted free, smashing the baton into one side. Lyria darted in low, tripping the other with a sweep of her tail before slashing his leg. The leader saw his men falling back and shouted in frustration. "Enough. Take them both." Just as the circle closed, a sharp whistle cut through the fog. From the far end of the alley, a sleek hover truck rolled in. A hatch popped open, and a familiar voice called out, "Evan, get in." It was Rain. Without thinking, Evan grabbed Lyria's hand and ran. The attackers surged forward. But Rain's truck blasted a burst of compressed air from its side vents, knocking them back long enough for Evan and Lyria to dive inside. The hatch slammed shut, and the truck shot forward through the small window. Evan saw the leader's furious face fading into the fog. "You're in deep trouble," Rain said, gripping the controls. Evan managed a breathless laugh. "You have no idea." They didn't stop until they reached the edge of the city, there, hidden in an old warehouse. Rain revealed a small starship just big enough for 2. "It's unregistered," he said. "Once you're out of the system, they can't track you." Evan looked at Lyria. Her fur was ruffled. A few cuts on her arms, but her eyes were steady. She stepped toward the ship, then stopped, turning back to face him. "You? Come," she asked quietly. He blinked. "You don't want to go alone." She shook her head. Her voice was soft, but the words were clear. "I chose your door." "I stay." Evan felt something tighten in his chest. She could have gone anywhere. Found safety far away from his problems, but she wanted to stay with him, and somehow he knew he wanted the same. They boarded the small ship together as the engines. Warmed, Evan glanced at Hershey had curled up in the seat beside him, tail wrapped around her legs, just like that first night outside his apartment. Only now there was no fear in her eyes, only trust. The ship lifted into the misty sky. The city, with all its danger and noise, began to shrink below them. Evan didn't know what waited ahead, but he knew one thing for certain. No matter where they went, she would follow, and no matter what came, he would keep the door open for her always.